And I am live. What's going on? My name's Armando Gong, and in case you were wondering, I am starting a new, more lives basically, trying to basically talk about my experience through physical therapy school. I just finished my first term. I'm finishing my first term, and I thought I would share some things that I am picking up along my journey in order to help any other new student physical therapists trying to get through and trying to survive and thrive. And for today's topic, we're talking about nine study tips and things that I kind of picked up in order to try to help me get through my courses and just basically make it through. And let me just add this to the stream. And here we go. So this is me. I'm just going to Mercy College. This is my first term, finishing up soon within the next week. And I thought it'd be great to just share, like I said, these first tips. And my first tip that I would love to share is just basically prioritizing your sleep. Because I know for a fact that for me, a lot of times what I tend to do is try to basically cram in as much studying as I can do before like an exam, a quiz, a test. And what happens in order that suffers is because I get a lot of lack of sleep as a result of that. And we all know this. It's like a lot of times we try to get in more studying, we sleep later in the night. And that's the first thing that usually goes. It's not that we stop going to work. It's not that we stop doing things around with our families. It's that our sleep goes. And I know for a fact that, for me, like my performance suffers a great deal whenever that happens. And I've heard from lots of other my classmates that what do you call it? What they do is that they try to cram in as much studying the night before. And I'm hearing stories of people sleeping at like 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, sleeping from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock a.m., getting up at 9 o'clock in order to pass their exams. And then like they sleep for the rest of the class. And I feel like that is not a productive manner because quite honestly, like going through PT school is ultimately a marathon, is not a sprint. And when you deprioritize your own self-help, it's like you need to have like a consistent sleep schedule because ultimately as you pick up, try and cram more things into your life. Like I know for me, like after a certain point, my eyes just glaze over the study material. I am not absorbing it enough and therefore it is much more prudent for you to prioritize your sleep consistently throughout the entire term so that you're in the best condition so that you can take in all the material that you can take in. So that's my very first tip, and I really want to emphasize that like sleep is important, and so you should always be getting more sleep. And I don't know if it's considered a study tip, but I know that helps me study a lot more and take in and learn more things in the long run. So the second thing I want to talk about is like actually scheduling out your study blocks. And like what I mean by this is that especially in PT school, like I had like 3 or 4 classes, like patient client management, physiology, gross anatomy, anatomy lab. Those are my classes, right? And I think it's very easy to basically focus on one subject matter at a time and do that for like an entire week because you have an exam or quiz or something coming up and neglect your other courses. And so to actually go against that is like actually schedule out blocks of time throughout each day so that you're not just focusing on like anatomy, you're not just focusing on physiology, you're actually getting bits and pieces of it throughout the week so that you actually have a schedule to do it rather than basically relying on like, oh, I'm going to study like after dinner and just not make out actual blocks for times of that because you want to be able to get in as much time across all your subject matter so that you can actually take it all in instead of focusing on one thing at a time all the time. So that's my biggest number two tip, like always be scheduling your sessions. Third tip is actually to like build in some breaks in between your studying. And I know like a lot of us like to like carve out, like, let's say one day from like, let's say 3 to 9 o'clock, basically studying the entire time on, let's say anatomy, let's just say. When ultimately like you actually need to build in a bunch of breaks in between to give your mind some time to relax because I'll take that as like a like going to the gym, right? You need rest sets and reps in order to get in like your proper rest intervals in to be actually to be at peak performance. So build in your study breaks. And some people use the Pomodoro method. I did not find that that worked for me, but build in a study break, whether that's 25 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, and always be taking breaks during these study times because it helps you give your mind time to relax. It gives your brain, your body a time to just what do you call it? Just just relax, take some time off, recuperate, recover, because ultimately, like I said, it's all about making it a marathon, and you always have these times in order to take in what you need to take in. So build in your study breaks, and even on these study breaks, it doesn't mean going on your phone. That's not a break. It means going outside, relaxing, maybe taking a breather, getting some sunlight in, getting some food into yourself. All just taking a break from actually going being on your computer, because that's where all of us are studying from, on a computer, on our laptop, and whatnot. And if any of this is like making sense to you or resonating with you, leave a comment below because I like to hear and have these conversations. So build in your study breaks for yourself. And this is kind of a weird one to kind of throw in here, but I think it's also important to be always reading like other material and just learning about things just outside of PT school because it makes you a much more broader person. You develop your a broader understanding of what goes on besides just focusing on anatomy and physiology, what makes you a good physical therapist. And for me, one of the books I started reading is Make It Stick. And the next two tips are related to that because this is all about how you can learn. And what I've taken up from this book and try to implement in myself is like basically what I've been doing to try to learn the material that I'm learning through school. And this is what I'm talking about. And if you want to pick up this book, I'm going to leave a link down below for you to pick up and take a look because I got a lot of things about that changed and shifted how I approach learning new material. And I thought it would be very helpful for you to talk about it. But ultimately, it's like my whole point about this slide is also just to reiterate that it's also important to have outside behavior, outside hobbies, and reading new books so that you can always broaden your database of knowledge is important. So that's number 4, reading. And in my case, it's just read. This book is about making it stick and about the science of learning. And one of the things that came out of this book is the idea of active recall. And I'll use myself as an example because who else am I going to use, right? Like, I know whenever I go through lectures and schools and classes, right? A lot of times I'm just scribbling down what the professor says. And at the end of the class, maybe when I'm trying to study, I just reread my notes and read the book and hope for the best that some of this material for stick. But what I've started shifting, and that worked for me in like my undergrad classes and even my prerequisite classes, but it did not work for me like the first quarter of my term. And I realized that because like my grades are suffering, I'm actually not retaining the material. So what I've actually started doing instead is the idea of active recall. And for me, it emphasized like basically like always having these questions that pop up and whether I can actually answer this material. And it can come in the form of quizzes to myself, it can come in the form of tests, but basically, instead of having my material laid out in front of me and just me reading it and trying to absorb it through osmosis, I'm always constantly testing myself whether I can answer the question, whether I know what the professor is talking about. And I do this, and I'll show an example of what I do in class just to give you an idea of like what the idea of active recall is. But basically, it emphasizes just testing yourself on the material and seeing if you can actually basically come up with the idea from your head without it actually being in front of your eyes. And the next tip I want to talk about is like spaced repetition. And I think it's intuitive in the sense that a lot of times we like to cram and study and do everything right before a test. But what actually ends up happening is you don't actually learn the material. So I think we intuitively know that like if you review a material and learn the material very frequently throughout an entire week, month, several months, right? And you space it out so that you get some new exposure to it after a certain amount of time, you pick up on the material more frequently. You learn about it actually. So it's always about the idea, like the more you see something, right, the more you're able to actually understand it, get more reps in, get more viewings of it. And this is that same idea. You space it out however many times you get exposed to a certain material, and the more you get exposed to it, the more likely you're able to actually learn the material and go from there. So that's number 6. And I wanted to actually share with you like what I actually do in class so that people get an understanding of what, like a certain idea of how they can learn material, right? So let me share my screen real quick. So this is actually like one of my study guides. One of my classmates actually made up these questions, but the general idea is still the same. Let me just make these questions a bit bigger. All right. So before I mentioned how I usually, uh, what the typical thing would be for me to like, a lot of students is like jot down literally every single thing that your professor writes, your teacher writes, and review it later on. What I've started actually doing is making questions, trying to answer what it, or ask what it is that the professor is teaching. So let's give an example. Like for this question, like this is my friend, my classmate Mark. He made up a bunch of these questions, but I have a bunch somewhere down the line. But these are much more in legible. So, but for me, it's like, okay, if he's talking about the, let's say the pelvis, right? Like what bones make up the pelvis? We can talk about, and then basically frame a question and basically do a Jeopardy style, right? Like he's talking about the pelvis, all right? Like how can I make a question to answer the material that he's on? Just like, what are the 3 bones that make up the pelvis? The easy question, right? And as I go through the class, I keep on making more and more of these questions, right? And I can actually go and see what kind of other questions I have, right? Like for these are all muscles that we're talking about, and it's like he's explaining what all of these are things are doing. Well, like he's saying explaining what the obturator externus does, and then I make a question about it. What is the action of the obturator externus, right? But and then this basically makes up my study guide for how I review the material. Like I'm asking myself when I'm reviewing the material, what are the 3 bones that make up the pelvis? Can I actually answer that question? You know, it's like the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis, right? And then and what I do is like I actually put the answers on the right side hidden so that I don't actually see the answer. But when I actually move my cursor over to the right, click on it, and I actually got the answers. It's like ilium, ischium, pubis. Sweet. And then I mark down how easy was it for me to do it. And like I've been getting these answers right, and I kind of grade it in like a from grade difficulty of 1 to grade difficulty of 5. And it's color coded to tell me that I know this answer pretty well. So it's obviously green. I make it green. So therefore I know I should not be reviewing it down the line. But like as I go further down the line, right, there are some questions where I don't know the answers to this. Like, for example, this orange one, what structures run through the greater sciatic foramen? I think it's the lower extremity, all the vessels basically, right? That's my guess right now. And am I right? It's like all lower than nerves and vessels that enter the gluteal region. So I'm wrong on that. But like, so then for me, it's like, okay, I'm grading it as like a 5 so that like, I need to always be reviewing these red ones, the orange ones, and to a lesser extent, the yellow ones and the green ones. And this is like how I would basically do spaced repetition and active recall at the same time, basically making sure that I review the red things as much as possible. As they get easier and easier for me, I will slowly review the orange ones less, the yellow ones, the green ones, the least amount, so that I get as much exposure to the most difficult material as I can. And that way I am also forcing myself to recollect what exactly the answer is to these questions. So that's my tip number, I guess this is a demonstration of what it is I'm doing. So that was number 6. And then number 7, like I feel like a lot of times we think that learning new material should be like a very easy thing. If I watch a video, if I listen to the lecture, if I basically read a book, which is what we all typically used to do, then I will eventually learn all the material through osmosis and therefore learn the material. But in reality, it really should be taking a very hard approach to like, you should be taking effort to learn this material. Like, especially I'll give an example of like working out, right? Like if you're going to the gym and you're working, but it's not even like stimulating you, is not really making you exert any effort. You're going to the gym. You're pretty much not going to get as good of a result as you can if it was actually exerting a bit more difficulty, if you're making more effort, if you're just being taking a lot more harder approach to it. So learning should feel hard. And the more actually in the book, it actually talks about how the harder something actually is, the more likely you are going to learn about it and learn that material. And therefore, it's like if I go through this, I go through this. If I go through my study guide, if I go through it a lot of times, and I actually don't know an answer that well, but I just keep on trying as much as I can, and just keep on just putting that time and effort in. Eventually, I will learn the material, and it'll feel really hard at that moment, but in the long run, I'll actually pick up on it better than if like I keep on reading the material over and over again, thinking I learned the material, when in reality, I'm just basically knowing it in that one moment and not down the line. So learning should feel hard is what I got for this tip. And I talked briefly about this earlier before about changing your approach to things. Like I know I had to shift like how I approach my study habits early on in this session, early on in the term, because it was not getting me the results I want. The quizzes I were getting was not satisfactory. I didn't think I was actually learning the material. And for me, it's like you can either do more of the same of what you were doing, or you can change your approach drastically. Try and see if that a new approach gets you your results that you're looking for and adapt from there. And I think it's important to like know if what you are currently doing is yielding the results that you want. And you can even apply this to like across the board. It's not just like studying, it's about just life in general. Is what you are currently doing getting the results that you're looking for? And if it isn't, it's a good idea to like switch it up, try something else, try that out for a little bit, see if that works. And for me, I had to basically switch to doing, like I said, the active recall, making my own study guides so that I can actually pick up the material rather than just straight up reading the material and hoping for the best. So I think my this approach is basically just change up your approach if some things are not working for you so that you can get the results that you're looking for. So that's number 8. And then my last tip, like being able to teach the material that you are currently learning is a great sign of mastery. And obviously, my professor is really good at it. But ultimately, it's like, are you able to actually teach the things that you are currently learning to someone else? If you can even teach it to like a toddler, a kid, a young child, someone where you're just not using like fancy language, but you're still able to get the point across, I feel like that's a great sign of mastery. And for me, like that's something I'm looking to start learning to do is like learn my material and teach it to someone else. And I'm planning on actually like starting like another show basically to in order to like basically review my anatomy and any subject matter and trying to teach it to someone else like on the stream so that it's a good sign of me being able to get more practice in like basically relaying that material, but also showing a sign of mastery in terms of what it is that I am learning right now. Can I actually verbalize it and basically make it make sense to somebody else? And I think if you can take that to your own study habits, being able to teach that to someone else, maybe your classmates, maybe like your friends and family, like can you teach them that material in a very uh, basic manner? And if you can, I feel like that's a great sign that you've actually learned the material. So that's my number 9. And just to summarize all my basic study tips, like number 1, get your sleep in. Don't sacrifice it for your studying because ultimately you learn while you sleep. Number 2, actually block out schedules, schedule out your time so that you get the appropriate studying across the board. Number 3, schedule in your breaks during the time that you're studying and not just try and study from like 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, long time intervals, and give your brain a time to recover. Number 4, actually read other material because you can pick up on other things and develop your broad base across the board and just find other ways to make it more relevant for yourself. My case, I had make a stick where I got uh, active recall and spaced repetition in, basically trying to redefine how I study. And active recall, meaning trying to actually recollect the information from your own memory in order to actually prove that you actually know the material rather than just reading it in front of your screen. Spaced repetition, talking about how getting more exposure to the material across time and getting more and more exposure to more and more difficult material. So that's number 7. I had a quick demo of that, and if you're interested in like seeing what my spreadsheet actually looks like, leave a comment below. Number 8 is like actually changing the approach to what it is that you're doing if it doesn't yield the results that you're looking for. Because if something isn't working for you, you need to change up what it is that you are currently doing. Doing more of the same will just yield you more of the same result. If you're failing already, it just yields you to more failure, basically. And find the approach that works for you and to get the results that you're looking for. And then my last tip is like being able to actually teach the material to somebody else, because that to me shows a sign of great mastery. Also gives you more reps in, gives you more time in to be able to actually tell someone what it is that you're learning. So that's number 9. And those are basically all my study tips for that, like I feel like has helped me get through PT school, or not even PT school. My first term of PT school was like a long journey ahead, like 3 years, but 3 years passes by in the blink of an eye. And it's good to set up like systems and habits and also change up your approach in order to make it work for yourself. And as next week, I'll talk about more of this, like just what's going on through my own PT school journey, hoping to help other PTs not struggle as much as I did during my first month, 2 months. And I haven't figured it all out, but I think it's always fun to share what it is I'm going through so that other people can kind of understand. And especially if you're a first year SPT like I am, it's like making you thrive in your new role as an SPT, because a lot of this is going to go by in the blink of an eye. Like I didn't even realize like my first term was going to end so quickly, but but in that moment, it feels like a struggle. And I think it's great if I can help someone else basically avoid the pitfalls that I'm going through and sharing what's worked for me. So these are like my 9 study tips, and leave a comment below if any of these tips made sense for you, or if you got some of your own study tips to share with other people. All right. I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I'll check out with you guys next time. Bye bye.